Hello there, it's Archie. I'm back for the ADHD Care Podcast. I hope you're doing well out there. I have a special guest joining me today on this edition of the podcast. I have Laura Kerbey, who is a specialist teacher who has many years who's worked in education as an autism consultant, and she's also an author. She specializes mainly with individuals, mainly children, young people that have autism, predominantly specializing in pathological demand avoidance or PDA. So Laura, she's also a public speaker, provides training and support on neurodiversity, and she's also a proud neurodivergent herself. So today we are discussing all things pathological demand avoidance. So yeah, let's bring Laura onto the call.
Oh, there you go. Hi,
Hello.
Archie.
Hi, Laura. How
How are
are you?
you? Yeah,
Yeah,
good, thank you.
good to see you.
Hmm. And you?
Yeah,
How's
it's
it
been a
going?
while. Yeah, all good, all good. Yeah, yeah, really keen to bring it on and to talk to you about all things pathological demand avoidance, PDA. So
Yeah,
I know obviously
cool.
that's your bread and butter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so yeah. And yeah, so first of all, maybe would you mind just explaining to our listeners that might not be familiar with the term pathological demand avoidance and how that is associated with autism?
Yeah, so PDA is understood to be a type of or a profile of autism. You can't have a PDA diagnosis unless you have a autism diagnosis. And although they present quite differently, the PDA presentation of autism is quite different to a more typical presentation of autism. Um, it is really important to remember that children and young people, adults with PDA are autistic. Um, PDA is sort of widely thought to be a type of autism which has where the individual has an anxiety-driven need to be in control. However, what is more important to PDA is about sorry, start again. What's more important to PDAs than control is autonomy. Um, And I use an analogy when I'm talking about this. I say to people, and I'll ask you this, Archie, if you were driving your car and you had a passenger next to you that initially started saying to you, "Oh, Archie, careful, slow down, there's a car ahead of you. Oh, Archie, you're going a bit fast. Oh, Archie, careful, the lights are turning red up there." How would you feel kind of initially with that kind of input from the passenger?
Um, I feel like I'm being controlled or told what to do, and yet I can
Yeah,
actually see what's happening. I'm the driver, so
yeah,
yeah, it's frustrating to some degree.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then imagine that you carry on driving, and then the passenger, rather than just giving like the verbal kind of stuff, starts trying to grab the wheel and actually sort of change the direction that you're driving the car in. How would you feel then?
Yeah, the frustration and yeah will build even more, and I will because they obviously putting me and them at risk by doing
Yeah,
that. So yeah, I would the frustration increase and probably yeah I don't want to
stop the
say I want
car
to
and
react in that
tell them to
situation.
get out. Yeah,
But to
yeah.
stop,
So
yeah, stop the car and tell them to get out. Yeah.
yeah. So PDAs, they have this very strong need for autonomy, and actually some people have actually renamed PDA as a pervasive or a persistent drive or desire for autonomy, which I actually prefer. But basically, for an individual with a PDA profile, being told what to do or even expected to do something, it's like a threat to the autonomy, and then the threats cause an anxiety based response, basically.
Isn't that how the question is phrased though? Like going back to the analogy of us driving. So if someone was sitting next to me and say to me, tell you what, there is a quicker route that we can go to, maybe isn't it to do with the actual phrasing of the
Yeah,
command?
language
Language,
is
yeah.
so important. So,
Yeah.
again, when I'm driving, I might ask for assistance. I might say to my passenger, like usually like my husband or one of my kids, I might say, "Oh, do you know which route we should go take here? Which roundabout exit do I take? Or do you mind passing me my water bottle?" And yeah, if someone says, "Oh, Laura, I know a quicker route if you want to take it." So that's great. It's what we have to understand about PDA is that it's not about never been able to give any kind of direction or even like any boundaries. Like, individuals with PDA like still need boundaries, but it's about the language that we use. It's so important, like just saying, I read something the other day actually, another autism uh, uh, advocate said that even if someone says, okay, wait a minute, that's like, oh God, don't tell me what to do. So it can be something so tiny that can trigger this anxiety based response.
What are some of the symptoms or behaviors that characterize PDA? So if anyone listening out there, would you mind outlining some of these characteristics that you notice?
No, not at all. So the first one is avoiding demands. And it can be anything, it can be getting up in the morning, it can be getting dressed, it can be having a shower, it can be cleaning teeth, it can be eating, it can be anything. Um, what's really, really important to understand about the PDA profile, though, is it's not just external demands that cause the demand avoidance. It can be internal demand avoidance as well. And this is something when we're doing our assessments for PDA that we have to really look at because, um, we have to sort of really identify the types of demands. And when we talk to parents or talk to the young person and they give us examples of things themselves that they really wanted to do, and then they can't do it. So it's not just other people suggesting, it's your own internalized wants and desires and expectations as well. We also look at the way that demands are avoided because PDA is a very, very clever and skilled and creative when it comes to avoiding demands. And they'll use quite sort of social strategies to avoid those demands as well. So lots of distraction, procrastination, flattery, um, delay. And when I talk to parents, they'll often say, oh, if only they put as much effort into doing the thing as they put into not doing the thing. Um, Another way that demands can often be avoided is by using quite extreme role play as well. So an individual might say, "Well, I can't possibly do that because I'm a cat," or they'll start meowing, or they'll become a dog, or some of the older children that I work with will um, start pretending that they're a baby or a toddler. So they'll actually take on a role or a character that can't do the demand. Or the kind of other end of the kind of spectrum of that is taking on a character that can do the demand. And then it's like, I'm not doing it. But if I pretend to be, I mean, my favorite example of this, Archie, is a young person that I met for the first time years ago, whose mum warned me that he would be very anxious about meeting me. And I said, that's fine, I'm used to working with anxious children. And I was met, we met at kind of like a neutral territory. It's a sort of cafe in London. And I was met by this like super confident, or in inverted commas, 10-year-old who kind of got up, shook my hand, said, Laura, did you have a good journey? And I said, yeah, it was great, thank you. He said, oh, can I get you a coffee? I said, yeah, I'd love a coffee. And then he came and sat down and he kind of interviewed me. So he was saying, Laura, how long have you been in this line of work? It must be fascinating. And the whole time he was chatting to me, he was doing shots of water. So he'd pour a little bit of water into a glass, do it like a shot, slam it on the table. And it was extraordinary. It was like meeting a kind of really like confident older man. And he winked at me, excused himself to go to the toilet. And his mum explained that she said, I'm really sorry, Laura. She said, you're not meeting so and so today. You're meeting Kate Winslet's fiance from the Titanic.
Okay.
And at the time, he was watching the Titanic film kind of like almost obsessively. And he couldn't meet me himself. The demand to meet a strange lady who was going to ask him questions about his feelings and emotions was too difficult. So he met me in the character of somebody who basically could do that.
Mm.
So we look at things like that. We also do see a lot of masking behavior within the PDA profile and children who can kind of go into school, those that are in school, and basically kind of like play the part of a good student or a well-behaved student. We do see quite a lot of impulsive behaviours within the PDA profile, and Archie, I'm sure you've seen this, but I would say probably half the children that we see for PDA assessments meet threshold for ADHD as well. So I always say, I think there's a big dollop of ADHD in the PDA recipe. We would see sensory differences because we're talking about autistic individuals. And another thing that's interesting about PDA is I don't really like talking about obsessions. I prefer kind of like special interests for neurodivergent people, but they often have very strong obsessions about people. So, and those can be very strong and they can be loving or loathing. So they might become very fixated on an individual. Like it could be a friend at school. No one else is allowed to play with that friend. They're their best friend. They get very upset, dysregulated if that child plays with someone else. It could be a member of staff. It could be a famous person. But similarly, there could be like the negative obsessions as well. I hate that person. I don't want anything to do with them. So those are like the main things we're looking for at assessment. There's lots of other
Yeah.
things about PDA as well.
If you think about the age of onset, or when these symptoms are of most prevalent, is there a particular age that we're talking about?
I think it depends. I mean, some of the families that we meet for assessments, they can see demand avoidance from when their child was born. There can be a language delay with PDA. Then there's often a very good degree of catch up. So it's almost, I mean, I know when my children were little, I would put a lot of demands on them to speak. If they wanted a drink, I'd dangle the cup in front of them and say juice or say milk. We do. I think as parents, we do put demands on our children to speak. So I think with the PDA, it's almost like I know what you're trying to do here, so I'm not going to talk until I'm ready. I'll do it on my terms. So we do see that. We often see kind of little peaks as well. So we see quite a lot of children around kind of like age 6, maybe when they've gone into year 1. So kind of nursery schools, receptions, children have quite a lot of autonomy. And then as they go into like year 1 at school, I think the demands can really increase. So we might see a little peak there. We often then see a lot of children who really struggle with that transition from primary to secondary school, because obviously the secondary environment is a lot more demanding and a lot less autonomous, and there's lots of other reasons as well. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the individual. It depends on how kind of significant the profile is and how sort of strong the characteristics are as well.
And how is PDA diagnosed?
So it'd be through multidisciplinary, usually through a multidisciplinary team or through some CAMS teams do recognise PDA. It is a little bit of a postcode lottery though, Archie, because it's not in the DSM.
Yeah.
So you can't get a standalone diagnosis of PDA. And there are some local authorities or some counties who are much more kind of like supportive of PDA than others. If people are listening to this and they're in Surrey actually have got quite a good kind of PDA position. But then there are other local authorities that just literally just won't kind of like entertain the idea. And that's really frustrating for parents, I think, when a parent knows that their child has this profile and then they're unable to get a diagnosis. So, anyone listening to this, you're not going to get a standalone diagnosis of pathological demand avoidance. They will have to, your child, if you're looking for your child, will have to get the autism part of the diagnosis first.
Yeah. When you think about PDA, for me, I think about it's not the same as well. I'm sure you've heard oppositional defiant disorder.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some overlaps there, would you say, with ODD and PDA?
I think on the surface, I think they can look quite similar, but that's very much when you're looking at the surface characteristics of, this individual is not doing what they're told to do. So I think the most important difference between PDA and ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder, is that ODD is not autism spectrum condition. So if a child just has an ODD diagnosis or an ODD presentation, they're not going to have the same level of difficulty with social communication, with sensory needs. They're not going to have these very sort of strong special interests. Another really, really important difference is that one of the features of PDA is that individuals with PDA don't really see or recognize hierarchy or authority. They very much see people as being equal. So with a PDA profile, if a child is unable to comply with the demand, it's usually the demand that's causing the anxiety. With an ODD profile, it could be that the young person is saying, no, I'm not going to do what you say. Why, because they see that that person is in a position of authority, like a teacher or a parent or someone. So the way that I look at it, and it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but the way that I look at it is PDA is I can't do it because that demand is a threat, whereas ODD is I won't do it because you've asked me to. Someone with ODD is not going to have that level of anxiety around the demands. They're not going to go to the great lengths that someone with PDA will go to. And another difference is that strategies that can work with ODD, so kind of like rewards, sanctions, those don't work generally with PDAs because they make the PDA feel out of control.
Mm. How does PDA affect daily life for families? Think about it.
Oh, I think it can have a real impact on family life. I think it can be really difficult if a family have got like one child with a PDA profile and then other children that are neurotypical, but it can also be very difficult. I've worked with families where one child has a PDA profile and the other child is autistic without a PDA profile. So they need a very, very different approach. Um, it's really difficult for families when their child has PDA and the child may have expressed sort of interest or enthusiasm about doing something or going somewhere. And then the day arrives for them to do that thing that they've previously shown interest in. And then they're like, I can't do it anymore because the demand has become too big. Um, Obviously, I do think PDA has a bad reputation, and certainly not all the children and young people that I work with are, aggressive and outward in their anxiety, but some are. And sometimes when a child is very triggered and very anxious, they might be aggressive towards their parents or towards their siblings. And of course that can be very, very difficult. Or some children, when they're very anxious, will go more into a kind of shutdown state. And again, that can be very, very difficult. So I think the impact on families can be really quite significant. And I think the other real challenge for parents with children with a PDA profile, I mean, there's lots, but one of them is that parenting a child with PDA is often very, very different to what we think parenting is going to be about or about how we've parented. And I think that can be very difficult for parents to kind of throw the parenting handbook out the window, um, and realize that they need to do something very, very different. And I think another challenge that I see is that sometimes parents are on very, very different pages with that as well. So one parent might be really kind of like embracing the low demand, give them lots of autonomy, and another parent might be saying, no, no, we're not doing it that way. And then there can be a lot of conflict within parents as well.
Yeah, which leads me nicely to my next question about what strategies or interventions are most effective in managing PDA.
So I think it's not so much about strategies. It really is about kind of a way of life. And I know that sounds a bit of a cliche, but I do think it's true. Um, and there's a reason why I say that. I think the first reason is that PDA is a very, very smart. So if they think, oh, you're using a strategy, they'll work it out. They're like, I know what you're trying to do here. I've had parents that have come on like courses that I run and then reported that their child has said to them afterwards, "You've been on a course. Like, I know what
Yeah.
you're trying to do here." Yeah, they're
Wow.
so smart. They're so smart. So I think it's about understanding that your child, first of all, the most important thing is understanding that your child is not saying, "No, I'm not doing these things because I want to be difficult or I want to make your life difficult." Your child is saying no because the demand is a threat. And forcing a child or trying to get a child to do something when they're frightened is like, the situation is going to escalate. So it's about understanding that, about giving them autonomy. So rather than saying, go and clean your teeth, you might say, do you want to put your pajamas on before you clean your teeth? Or do you want to clean your teeth now? Or do you want me to come back and do it in 10 minutes? Do you think you can clean your teeth, or do you want me to do it for you? Or even starting to look at sort of making things into a bit of a challenge or a game. So you can't clean your teeth standing on one leg. So again, making things into a game. Also recognizing that that might work initially, but once your child works out that's what you're doing, that might kind of ease off. I think it's really, really important as well with PDA to pick your battles. Like, ask yourself, why am I asking my child to do this? And there are certain things that we can drop the demand. Like, it's not that important. And that's usually the things that I really insist on in terms of, like, there does have to be some boundaries, is about keeping your child safe. So, for example, if your child wants to go out in the car and they're refusing to put their seatbelt on, then you can say, "I'm really sorry, I can't drive the car if we haven't got the seatbelt on. It's
Yeah.
illegal.
Mm.
The police see us, we're going to get pulled over, and we're not going to get to where we want to go." The other thing is that for PDA, you have to recognize that if they are going to do something and kind of comply with the demand, then they have to see the point of it. They have to see the what I refer to as the what's in it for me.
Mm.
And if they don't see the
Yeah.
what's in it for me, then, again, giving you an example, one of the children that I worked with once said that being told to come off his Xbox and do his homework was like having an ice cream taken off him and broccoli shoved in his mouth. He's like, "Why would I do that willingly?" Like, what's in it for me? So you've got to help them see that, what, like, the point of what it is that you're asking them to do. Otherwise, things just feel really arbitrary.
Mm.
Um,
It, I'm just
so
thinking about other parents listening and thinking, okay, it sounds like it's an approach. You have to adapt your approach, don't you, as a parent?
yeah,
Rather than making it as a demand, it's more like a suggestion, or, okay, like you're working with the young person, but at the same
yeah,
time, it's obviously giving the young person a lot of autonomy, which, again, lots of parents, they've got so much to juggle. You've got the kids to
mm,
look after, and you're trying to get them out the door, you're trying to get to school. They
mm,
might be thinking, okay, do I actually have time to be sitting here and kind of going, okay, do you want this? Do you want that? And what message is that sending to the young person? I kind of get it, but I'm just trying to
mm,
think, as a parent, it's like, I'm the parent. I think we come from that hierarchy position, don't we? I was talking to another person doing this podcast, and she was saying the top-down approach usually doesn't work, certainly with some of these young people. And if they
right.
perceive, okay, it's coming from, okay, I'm the parent, listen to me, which we all do that, don't we?
That just, yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
doesn't work with PDA.
yeah, and it's yeah, it's being a parent is challenging, as you know.
Mm,
It's yeah. I think we both have to, as parents, have to sit there and think about how we approach. Certainly, we want instant results. We want the child to just go, okay, just brush your teeth and put your shoes on, and then they do it.
mm,
But working with neurodivergent, as you know, it's how we adapt these approaches, and we end up
yeah,
getting frustrated.
yeah. And the
Yeah.
thing with PDA is that they will pick up on that. So the kind of more stressed you're getting because they're not cleaning their teeth or they're not getting in the car, they will pick up on that. Like, PDAs are so sensitive to tone of voice or language, facial expression. volume, etc. So if you're kind of into a point like where you're like, come on, I need to go, that's going to
Yeah.
make them feel more anxious. So I think what's really, really important parenting these young people as well is validating how they're feeling. Like, I know you don't like getting ready in the mornings. I know you find the morning stressful. I know you don't like cleaning your teeth. And then, you know, a really good tip is looking at kind of like sharing demands as well, because when you share demands, you make them smaller. Um, I've worked with families that have said things to me like, well, my child's 8 now. I would expect them to be, they should be able to get themselves ready in the mornings. And it's like, yeah, but your child, okay, they're 8, but they're PDA. Like, you
Yeah.
can either help them to get ready in the mornings and share that demand and maybe get in the car on time, or they'll still be in their bedroom like half an hour after you've wanted to leave the house because they can't manage that demand. I think the other thing that is just so important when you're parenting children with this profile is understanding the level of anxiety that they're experiencing all the time as well. Because I think that also then makes you more likely to kind of like validate how they're feeling as well, and less likely, look, all of us as parents get frustrated and angry sometimes. Like, I'd be lying if I said I never did. I think when you think, right, it's not my child's fault that they can't do this. This is because of their anxiety. I think you're then more likely to kind of look for solutions for them.
Hmm. Moving on from the parenting side of things, let's focus on education and social setting. Let's start with education. What challenges do young people face with PDA in education settings?
I mean, huge challenges. So back in 2018, the PDA Society did a survey of nearly 1,000 young people and found that 1,000 young people with PDA, and of those, about 70% were unable to access school. So it's huge. And again, going back to my point earlier, a lot of the young people that we see um, kind of cope in primary. I think the primary system is more nurturing, it's more autonomous, and then that transition into secondary school is really, really challenging. Um, you know, Schools are, particularly the secondary system, kind of going back to what you were just saying, Archie, the teachers just simply don't have time to be thinking, oh, I need to be offering them lots of choices. I need to be offering them different work to the other children. It's very, very, I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for those teachers, and I'm not blaming the teachers, it's the system that's wrong. The other thing is that, it comes back to that what's in it for me factor that a lot of most of us as neurodivergent people have, where we need to see the point in what we're doing. And I'm saying we because I'm neurodivergent as well. When I was at school, I'm not PDA, but the frustration that I experienced about having to learn certain subjects that I just did not see the point in learning. And for PDAs, I think it's even stronger. However, the other thing to say about PDAs on a real positive about them learning is that they are usually, you know, hungry to learn about the things that they want to learn. They're very autodidactic. They actually can teach themselves. So what they usually really thrive on is very much a child-led learning style. So there are some primary schools where I've seen this done brilliantly, where the child is kind of on their own learning journey, and the staff in the school are just there kind of like facilitating that learning. Again, that gets much harder in secondary. For me personally, the most successful route for education for PDA is usually AOTAS, so education other than at school, or um, being home educated.
Mm,
There are some schools that are doing great work.
mm,
Um, they the statistics speak for themselves. Most children with a PDA profile are not in school, and there's a reason for that.
yeah. And linked in with that, the social aspect of it. So I'm just thinking, mixing with other young people and that impact that they have in terms of interacting without the, integration, social integration, basically, I'm trying to get to. Do you see a lot of young people struggling with that side of things as well?
Yeah, I do. And again, this is one of the kind of slight contradictions about PDA, that they are usually very socially driven. They like being around other people, they like being around other children. But as I keep saying, they are autistic. So what
Yeah.
you might see is the child with PDA being very controlling, for example, trying to really control their peers. Um, and the peers might only kind of like be able to tolerate that for a short amount of time. And then those friendships fall apart. Or you see, the quite obsessive tendencies towards other children. But I've got a couple of books on PDA, and the book I did for teenagers was really interesting. And what one of the we interviewed teenagers with PDA for that book, and what one of them was saying was that I'm brilliant at making friends. I know this person quite well. They're very charismatic. They can walk into a room full of people. Most people will notice them. And they were saying when I interviewed them, I'm brilliant at making friends. I can walk out of a coffee shop with someone's phone number. Then they find friendships very demanding. So, like having to reply to texts or pick up the phone if a friend calls, or if a friend's having difficulties, like a couple of the other teens that we interviewed for that book said, I find other people's problems really demanding, so then I just walk away. Um, and yeah, just being autistic means that there's going to be challenges with social communication. So, reading between the lines, like perhaps saying things that other people feel are inappropriate or insensitive. Um, it can be very difficult. However, having said that, you know, PDAers would also make the most amazing friends and be incredibly loyal. And I think what I've seen with the young people that I work with is that when they do kind of click with people, they can form really fantastic friendships as well
Going
when they
back to
feel
the point
safe.
about okay, the point about school that you're saying that mainstream schools certainly you can see clearly them struggling. How about specialist schools where it could be like an autism specialist school? Those kind of schools, do you feel those settings to some extent better, or
Like it
is it still a challenge?
depends. Yeah, it depends, Archie. So I do get asked this question quite a lot, like what's the best type of school for a child with a PDA profile? And what my answer to that is always, it's not the type of school, it's the people in the school. That's what makes the difference. I think I have seen some autism specialist schools do brilliant work with PDAs, but then I've seen also, because typically autistic children need a lot of structure and a lot of routine, and those schools for autistic children often run along those lines, and actually that doesn't always really work for a child with a PDA profile, because it's too structured, it's too routine based, and actually a routine can become a demand. So if those schools, for example, specialist schools, autism schools, have got a really good understanding of PDA, and they can almost kind of create like their own PDA friendly environment within that school, then it can work well. But if you put a child with a PDA profile in a classroom with lots of other children who are autistic without a PDA profile, and those children need really rigid structure, routine, timers, now next boards, really clear instructions of when you've done this, then you can do that. That might be really beneficial for a child without the PDA profile, but for a child with, that's just going to feel overwhelmingly demanding.
Yeah, it is. You can see you describing it. It sounds like a demand, honestly. Just the
Yeah,
pressure that they feel. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So the young people that you see, majority of them, would you say are they being homeschooled or?
I think it's probably it depends what age they are. So we see quite a lot of children with the profile who are, like I said, they're actually coping in primary okay. Um, I can probably count in the years that I've been doing the work that I do, and I'm sorry if this sounds negative, but I can probably count the number of children with a PDA profile who are in a mainstream secondary school on one hand. if that, like probably wouldn't even use all my fingers. It is such a challenging environment for them. Um,
Mm.
so usually, yeah,
Yeah.
those children will be home educated or have an AOTIS package or be in some sort of alternative provision. So even the schools that I know that some of my PDA clients are going to, they've got a lot of autonomy. There's a lot of kind of like, schools that are using very kind of like holistic therapeutic approaches can often work better.
Yeah.
Um, and the most important thing for any child with this profile is to have people that they feel safe with.
Mm.
They've got to feel safe. Like one of my books, like one of the chapters is entitled, titled the antidote to anxiety is trust. Like the safer a child with a PDA profile feels, the more trust they have in the person they're with, the lower their anxiety will be.
Mm. Um, in terms of education and healthcare plans, EHCPs, would they include something like PDA within it?
Yes, they
Yeah.
should do. And if they don't talk
Yeah.
about PDA, they should at least talk about demand avoidance. Um, and again, the kind of strategies that would be included in that EHCP should be very much looking at the PDA profile. Um, there is actually an example of a PDA, like an EHCP kind of template for a child with a PDA profile on the PDA Society website. And I know that quite a lot of the families that I work with have, and Senkos I've worked with as well, have actually found that a really, really, really useful document. Um, but yeah, I mean, often what I see on an EHCP for a child with a PDA profile is still quite a lot of like autism strategies, and they can be
Mm.
really unhelpful for children with PDA. It can actually be quite counterproductive, actually.
Yeah. Saying that, I'm just thinking from a treatment approach. Generally speaking, people focus on either the anxiety or the behaviors that you're seeing, which are being driven
Yeah,
by, in response to, in this case, the demand that's causing them to react in a certain way. So you
yeah,
find that some of these young people might end up being in those mental health specialist, educational mental health settings, or
yeah.
in an autism sort of specialist school with a or mainstream school with an ASD
Mm,
unit attached to it. Um, just because obviously, yeah, it's like focusing on the secondary rather than looking at the underlying cause of it. Certainly from a
mm.
medication point of view, some of these young people might end up being on something that like, anti SSRIs, anxiety
Yeah,
medication, or something like risperidone, because obviously the behaviors, the
yeah,
outbursts that they display with. But is that a right approach that we should be looking at these and treating? It feels like we're putting a plaster on it, just, oh
yeah.
yeah, it's the outburst that they're displaying. So therefore, they need something to calm them down, rather than looking at, as you say, the setting, the approach,
Yeah,
the experience that the parents or the teachers have to support the young person.
yeah, definitely. I mean, some of the young people that I work with are medicated, and it's very often for anxiety. Um, I think I'd never say that should be like the first port of call. Like, you should never be like, oh yeah, PDA, let's write a prescription for anxiety. Absolutely no way. What's more important, I think, for PDA is a therapeutic approach to support them with their anxiety. And again, I'm often asked, well, what's the best therapy for a PDA? Well, again, it's the therapist usually, and it's using a therapeutic approach that the young person is, you know, feels safe doing and is able to access. Usually because it's like linked to their interests. So it could be art therapy, play therapy, drama therapy. Again, it doesn't really matter the type of therapy. It's the therapist and making sure they've got that connection with them. Having said that, there are some young people that I've worked with who they're nowhere near ready for the therapeutic approach because they might be in burnout still. They might be recovering from kind of like almost trauma from being in the wrong school environment. So yeah, some of those children do do benefit from SSRIs to sort of just bring the anxiety levels down so that then they're more able to kind of cope with or be able to access the therapy. But I think it's what you said, Archie. It's about looking at so many different factors. There's no point medicating a child and putting all loads of therapy in place if their school and home environment are still not being adapted to be like lower demand and more autonomous.
Yeah.
Like you say, just continuously sticking plasters over them.
Yeah. How important is, like, we talk about early intervention and things. Does that apply with PDA?
Think again, it would depend on the individual, but it would also depend on what that early intervention looks like. If it's been done in a very structured, rigid way, it's probably not going to help. The most important thing that any PDA needs is connections with the people around them, like connections and feeling safe and basically trusted people as well, whether that's parents, extended family, professionals that they're working with. They have to have those connections in their life,
Mm.
more over and above anything, basically.
In terms of research, has there been any research done in this area of PDA?
I think this is, yeah, I mean, really limited research, and I think I always say we need better and more research into PDA. I don't feel like we've really scratched the surface of this um type of autism. Someone described it the other day to me, and not in a bad way. They said, oh, it's a slippery condition to try and kind of get your head round. And I was like, yeah, I get that. Like, it's difficult to kind of like grasp really what PDA is. So I definitely think we need more research. I think the research would help us understand PDA better, but also I think it would help with some of the kind of controversy around PDA, the fact it's not in the DSM, for example, the diagnostic manual. Like, some people use that as an excuse or a reason not to diagnose, um, or even to say, well, it doesn't exist. And I can't see PDA being more, what's the word, like more credible without more research, basically. So I think it's really
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you have any sort of success stories of young individuals you worked with, who maybe you've supported, and how that's all kind of panned out in their life?
Yeah, I've got loads. Like
Yeah.
I'm so positive about PDA. Like I say in my educator's book, like when you work in education, you're not meant to have favorites, but I do, and they've all got PDA. Oh, Archie, like there's so many. I mean, I was asked recently to provide some examples actually for a colleague's book. I was like, God, yeah, I don't know which ones to pick, but I think I just give you one. So I met I'll never forget the call. I had a dad phone me probably about 6 years ago now. And first of all, it's quite unusual for dads to contact me. I don't know whether you find this such. It's usually mums. I don't.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
unusual that this dad called me, and I could tell by his voice that he was an older dad as well. And he asked me, he explained his situation, that his son was basically confined to his bedroom, that he had kind of managed in primary school, but the transition into secondary school had been awful, and he had just become more and more withdrawn and wouldn't leave his bedroom basically, wasn't able to go to school. Um, the dad asked me when I was running some parenting courses, workshops, and I told him the dates, and he ended up getting a train from England to Scotland so that he could attend a workshop that I was doing on a Saturday. Because he said, I can't come in the week because my wife works, and one of us has to stay at home with our son the whole time. It's not safe to leave him. So he got the train to Scotland to come to this workshop because it was on a Saturday. At the time that their son didn't have any diagnosis, and the dad fought really hard to initially get a diagnosis of autism with a PDA profile. They then fought really, really hard to get him an EHCP. they then fought really, really hard to get him an AOTAS package. So the child came into my AOTAS service, initially would not engage with the tutor, wouldn't speak to the tutor, but the tutor worked so hard, and eventually they formed this really, really good connection. Fast forward like two or 3 years, that young person left the tutoring service with the highest number of qualifications that the Open College Network have ever awarded to one student ever, and has just been offered 3 unconditional places to go to university.
Wow.
And it's like,
Wow.
and I'm still in touch with he left Kite a couple of years ago. My Kite's the tutoring service, but I've stayed in touch with Dad, and it just goes to show how much what these young people can do when they're given the right support. And actually, I've got loads of stories like that.
Mm,
Literally, we could fill an hour's podcast just talking about them.
mm, mm.
But
Yeah.
the one thing behind all, well, not one thing, the kind of the consistent factors behind all the success stories are parents who have learned to get it, who have, like I said, thrown the parenting handbook out the window and gone, this is, and it hasn't been easy for those parents to completely like adjust their parenting style. So that's the first thing. The parents that have kind of gone, right, okay, what do we need to do to support our child? Two is the right educational support. Three could be input from mental health services who get it. It could be therapeutic input there. There could be support through like the more of a medication route, even though that's not for everyone. And then I think just, giving the child lots of patience, lots of autonomy, and not rushing it. And then, yeah, just seeing incredible outcomes.
Mm,
Also, what can be really helpful, um, although it can be difficult for the child or young person to accept it initially, is understanding their PDA. That's really, really important. So having like a good insight into why they find things difficult, but then also being able to self-advocate as well is really, really important.
mm. Um, in terms of resources for individuals or for the families dealing with PDA, is there websites, books, organisations? You mentioned obviously PDA Society. Do you mind just maybe listing them out for our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, the PDA Society's got loads of information and lots of free information. Um, the number of books being written about PDA is kind of growing all the time, which is amazing. A lovely book that I always recommend to families is The Family Experience of PDA by Eliza Frickel. It's a very easy book to read. It's fully illustrated. Um, and then I've written a couple of books on PDA. So I've written The Educator's Experience of PDA and The Teen's Guide to PDA. And both of those books would be useful for anybody that wants to learn about PDA. I've had families read the Educator's book and say how much they've found it helpful. And although we wrote the Teens Guide for teens, like again, we've had some really nice feedback. There's a lovely book by Steph Curtis called PDA in the Family, Life After the Light Bulb Moment, which is very much their journey as a family with a child with a PDA profile. So it's growing all the time, which is fantastic because there
Mm,
needs to be as much information out there as possible about PDA.
yeah. Um, how can our listeners contact you or connect with you to follow your work or to find out more about your services?
Yes, so I've got a website which is www.p-ast.co.uk. So it's past with a hyphen. I've also got a very, very active Facebook page. So the Facebook page is past and then positive assessment support and training. But if they go to the website, there's a link to the Facebook page, Instagram, and then there's contact buttons as well.
Mm. I'm just thinking from a clinician's point of view, like some clinicians that might not be really familiar with PDA, and we deal with rating scales and screening questionnaires and stuff.
Mm.
For any clinicians that might be interested in maybe wanting to screen further for PDA potentially before making a referral to
Yeah.
services like yourself, are there any rating scales or places that they can visit and go to get more information about questionnaires or rating scales that they can use?
Yeah, definitely. So the three main ones that I would look at are the EDAQ, which is the Extreme Demand Avoidance Questionnaire. There's an adapted DISCO, which looks specifically at PDA type behaviours. And then there's also the Coventry Grid, which does a scoring for autism, PDA, and attachment as well. So those would be the three that I would initially look at.
Amazing. That's great. That's fascinating. I've learned a lot from you just from
Thank you,
this
Archie.
conversation. That's been really good. Is there any final message or anything you want to say before we round things off?
I mean, as I said, I'm so positive about PDA, and I think there is a lot of negativity around it. Um, and I think PDA's kind of got quite a bad reputation over the years. But I honestly, I don't believe it. I know it. I've seen it myself that with the right support and understanding, individuals with PDA, I think they can change the world. I honestly think that they are kind of like a guiding light in terms of the way that they look at the world. And I think they're quite inspirational, actually. I think we can genuinely learn a lot from them.
No, no, that's well said there. I think sometimes things can feel like this never ending and things. But yeah, leading on to that, does it improve with age at all? I just remembered I was going to ask you this question.
I
As they're
think
getting
it really,
older.
yeah, definitely. I think it can.
Hmm.
I think the what happens is that the demands of life obviously change all the time. I think it can be, um, I think I bet you see this with your clients, Archie. I think adolescence is such a challenging time anyway, isn't it? Sort of going through puberty. And I think that once young people kind of come out of that kind of difficult adolescence time, but also as you go through education, you get more autonomy. Like once you kind of get into sort of post 16, you can go to college, you can choose the things that you want to learn about, the things that you want to do. And just sort of having a better understanding of yourself and your brain and how it works and um being able to sort of self-advocate for yourself, I think it can make a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you have
yeah,
to go through, I think it can be a very challenging time, that kind of teenage time, but yeah,
yeah.
coming out of it, I think
Mm.
it can be much sort of clearer skies ahead.
Yeah, yeah. No, and your books again, if people want to purchase your books, are they available on kind of Amazon and all the other
Yeah,
bookstores?
available on Amazon, so and on the Jessica Kingsley website, and I think most websites actually. But yeah, so there's the Educator's Guide to PDA, and then the Teens Guide to PDA, and then I'm currently writing a very like two more, which will be released next year, and one is going to be very short, easy to read book for children who want to understand PDA better. So that could be siblings, for example, of a child with a PDA profile, but also a really simple guide for adults. So quite often parents will say to me, could you write something I could give to my mum and dad? Because obviously grandparents are looking after the child and they're not, quite getting it, or maybe using a bit too many kind of like strict strategies. So those are what I'm currently working on, and they'll be available next year.
Mm. You mentioned about workshops. Do you want to say a little bit more about your workshops?
Yeah, so we'll be running some more in the new academic year. So we'll be looking at sort of probably September, October. We usually run those in Leatherhead, in Surrey. I do online stuff as well. So I've got a webinar on the 9th of September, which is based on the Teens book. But then we'll be running some in-person events as well. The best way to find out about those is usually on the Facebook page, actually, because we advertise them on the Facebook page. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, having a bit of a break over the summer holidays, and then we'll be writing the new program for after the summer break.
excellent. That's amazing. That's great. Laura, it's been absolute pleasure catching up with
Thank
you.
you, Archie. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all.
It was lovely to chat
Yeah,
to you. Catch up
good to
again
see you.
soon. All
Yeah, speak
right, take
soon. Take
care.
care. All the best.
Thanks.
See you
Bye,
later.
and
Bye,
you.
bye, bye,
Bye.
bye, bye.